Ukraine has in recent months increasingly shifted part of its strategy from conventional fronts to asymmetric tools, drones, cyber attacks, precision strikes deep behind enemy lines. The logic is clear. Russia holds strong advantages in artillery, air power, manpower, and heavy weapons. To offset that, Ukraine must reach into Russian depth strike supply lines, energy infrastructure, command centers, military airfields, and show that no part of Russian territory is entirely safe. In that context, a drone attack on Moscow is not only symbolic, but also operational. It signals reach, imposes costs, and creates pressure on Russia to divert resources to defense farther from the front. The raid in question, described by Russian and Ukrainian sources as the largest drone assault on Moscow since previous strikes earlier in the war, unfolded overnight on September 22-23, 2025. According to Moscow's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, Russian air defense units destroyed at least 44 Ukrainian drones approaching the capital. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed even greater numbers, that 81 Ukrainian drones were shot down over 8 regions between Monday afternoon and midnight, and that between midnight and 7 a.m. another 69 drones were intercepted. In total, from Russian government accounts, many dozens of drones were involved. From Moscow's point of view, the assault caused no reported fatalities or large structural damage, though emergency services responded to sites where debris had fallen. The city's main airport, Sheremetyevo, was temporarily shut down for about 4 hours. Nearly 100 flights were cancelled and many more delayed. Commercial traffic in other airports was also impacted. Russian authorities insisted their interception systems had performed well. From Ukraine's side, there was no public immediate claim taking full responsibility, at least in early reporting. But analysts and commentators interpreted the raid as part of a growing pattern, Ukraine pressing into Russian airspace, stretching Russian defense networks, and forcing Moscow to devote more assets to homeland protection. One should note that Moscow has been struck by drone attacks before. In November 2024, for example, at least 34 Ukrainian drones targeted the city, triggering temporary closures of airports and some disruptions. That marked one of the earlier major forays into the capital. More recently, in March 2025, Ukraine launched a drone strike that reportedly killed 2 warehouse workers in Moscow that was described by Russian officials as their biggest drone attack ever. But this September 2025 attack, by scale as claimed by Moscow and timing, stands out. Russian officials called it the largest against the capital since March. The aim is evidently to raise the bar, to show that Ukraine's drones can reach deep, persist over time, and impose cumulative cost on the Russian home front. Why would Ukraine risk such a bold operation? A few strategic motives to force Russia to reallocate air defense assets. Every missile, radar, interceptor, command node that must be located nearer to Moscow is one less that Moscow can freely devote to frontline regions or more forward bases. To create uncertainty and psychological pressure, even if damage is limited, the fact that drones can approach the capital undermines perceptions of security that can have political, economic, and morale impacts. To degrade infrastructure, energy, communications, logistics if any high value targets are identified and penetrated, to signal capability to partners and adversaries alike that Ukraine can project force not just on the front but into Russian depth. To build momentum in drone warfare, doctrine learning scale operations, swarm coordination, electronic warfare countermeasures, etc. Of course, such attacks are risky and technically demanding. To send dozens or even over 100 drones toward Moscow demands stealth or suppression of Russian radar and detection systems along the path. The drones must evade or survive jamming, electronic warfare, radar tracking, and defense intercepts. Navigation over long distances, potentially across contested airspace, avoiding Russian air cover and patrolling aircraft, coordinating swarm timing, paths, altitudes, and sequencing in a way that saturates the defense. If drones arrive in manageable numbers or predictably, air defenses can pick them off one by one. Logistics and launch staging. Ukraine must launch from safe zones, transport drones, maintain them, possibly refuel or rearm them mid-flight or via relay, or use forward bases. Secure communications or autonomous guidance to reduce dependence on external links that can be jammed. Risk/loss acceptance. Many drones will likely be intercepted. The operation must budget for attrition. In many respects, successful drone raids into Moscow test the boundaries of Ukrainian drone technology, command and control, and tactical innovation. Russian air defense is formidable. Over time, Russia has invested heavily in layered defense systems, radar, interceptors, anti-aircraft artillery, electronic warfare, and counter-drone units. For the Moscovian region, that means early warning radars, multiple interceptor zones, and overlapping coverage. To penetrate that envelope is no easy feat. During the strike, the Russian government portrayed the attack as mostly repelled. Mayor Sobyanin emphasized that deaths and major damage were avoided, though he acknowledged debris fallen inside Moscow. The official spin frames Moscow's defense as competent and resilient, a message for internal audiences to reduce panic or a sense of vulnerability. At the same time, real disruption did occur. Airport operations were suspended, commercial flights were cancelled and delayed. That has downstream logistical and economic costs. Even if the direct physical damage is low, the disruption in air travel, civilian mobility, and possible panic in certain districts matters. The reaction from the Russian central government is also informative. They will likely intensify calls for further strengthening of homeland air defense, both in the greater Moscow region and in other strategic targets. Some military or security bureaucracies may demand reprioritization of interceptors, radars, anti-drone systems, and electronic warfare capabilities. That means resources that might otherwise go toward the front lines may be diverted inward. Domestically, Russian officials and media will try to emphasize that the strike was thwarted, that Moscow remains safe, and that resilience is high. But behind closed doors, the need to bolster defense, increase surveillance, do damage assessments, and manage citizen anxiety may be mounting. On the Ukrainian side, even without a public claim, launching such an attack sends messages to Russia, to the Ukrainian public, and to Western backers. It shows that Ukraine is not passive, but can hit back far inside Russian territory. It may help Ukraine domestically in maintaining morale and support. We are striking back. The aggression does not go unanswered. For Western partners, it underscores that their military aid in drones, electronics, sensors, and intelligence has real battlefield utility. However, there are costs and risks. Each launch invites retaliation. Russia could respond with escalated strikes inside Ukraine, perhaps targeting cities, supply hubs, energy infrastructure, or Ukrainian air bases. The Kremlin may intensify missile or drone bombardments against Ukrainian civilian areas. Ukrainian cities already under threat must brace for blowback. There is political risk, too. If one of the drones had hit a crowded civilian target in Moscow and caused many casualties, the backlash, Russian reprisals, international condemnation, escalation could be severe. The fact that, in this case, Moscow reported little damage or loss of life mitigated that risk. Another complexity, the fog of war means claims and counterclaims differ. Russia states that 81 plus 69 equals 150 drones were shot down across regions in that operation. The mayor says 44 over Moscow alone. Whether Ukraine launched more, some bypassing or being lost earlier is uncertain. Also, casualty reports, damage, and trajectory details can be opaque for days or weeks. Ukrainian sources may withhold confirmation or adapt messaging to avoid revealing methods or losses. The fact that the raid coincided with heightened diplomatic moments, Ukrainian President Zelensky's presence at the United Nations, appeals for international backing, suggests coordination. Sabotaging Russian morale on the eve of major international convenings carries symbolic weight. In press coverage, some tied the timing to Zelensky's meetings and appeals for sanctions, aid, and global pressure. One should place this attack in a broader pattern. Ukraine has in recent months increased long-range drone strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, refineries, petrochemical plants far from the front. For example, on September 24, Ukrainian drones reportedly struck the Salavat petrochemical complex in Bashkortostan, causing fires in a major refining unit. That illustrates the shift, Ukraine trying to impose economic cost and undermine Russian energy supply, even 600-1000 kilometers inside Russian territory. Earlier, Operation Spiderweb in June 2025 represented one of Ukraine's most audacious air-based strikes on Russian soil. In that operation, 117 drones, some launched from disguised trucks, targeted 5 Russian airbases across multiple time zones, striking bombers and other aircraft. That showed not only the reach, but the growing sophistication of Ukrainian drone and clandestine logistics capacities. The Moscow raid is in that same continuum, projecting asymmetric pressure inside Russia proper. Another point, drone warfare is evolving fast. Ukraine is mastering swarming tactics, autonomous flight, electronic warfare, counter, jamming, and decentralized command and control. That allows drones to adapt, reroute, or persist even when some links are severed. Russia, too, is adapting, with anti-drone systems, jamming, decoys, and layered defense. The Moscow raid is thus a test of whose technological edge is growing faster. Going forward, what might this attack portend? First, more frequent deep penetrations may become the norm. Just as earlier in the war, Ukraine launched drone raids on Crimea, Russian rear areas, energy hubs, depots, future strikes on Moscow may become part of regular pressure campaigns. Russia will have to assume that no part of its territory is entirely safe, especially strategic, infrastructure, or military zones. Second, Moscow might bolster defenses not just around its core but along major corridors to the capital, preemptive radar stations, interceptor batteries, anti-drone nets, and mobile units. That in turn forces Ukraine to devise more stealth decoys or sacrificial diversion drones to overwhelm defenses. Third, the economics of drone attrition become critical. If Ukraine loses many drones per raid, the logistical, financial, and human cost of maintenance, production, and replacement is heavy. Success depends on sustaining drone output, securing supply chains for electronics and propulsion, and innovating to reduce cost per unit. Fourth, political escalation is possible. Russia might escalate missile barrages on Ukrainian cities as retaliation, or push for intensified foreign intervention or concessions. The balance is delicate. If escalation spirals, both sides suffer. Fifth, propaganda and morale matter. Ukraine will likely portray the raid as a heroic pushback, evidence of resilience, and a message that Russia is vulnerable. Russia will emphasize thwarting the attack, stressing that Moscow remains secure, possibly blaming failures on external sabotage or treachery. The domestic battle over perception is nearly as important as physical effects. Sixth, third parties, Western nations, allies, neutral states will watch closely. Some may interpret Ukraine's strikes deep into Russia as justification for more arms support. Others might warn of increasing volatility or runaway escalation. Diplomatic pressure could increase. Seventh, the risk of miscalculation rises. If a drone strike veers off and hits a civilian target outside Moscow or impacts foreign territory, the consequences could spiral. Precision, control, and command restraint become essential. Finally, this raid underscores that the war is not static. The front lines, though important, are not the only locus of conflict. The conflict increasingly becomes multi-domain: drones, cyber, intelligence, sabotage, long-range strikes. Geography is extended. The war is no longer just about territories, but about reach, influence, and the ability to impose costs across distances. In sum, Ukraine's largest drone attack on Moscow is a milestone, both symbolic and tactical. The operation tested Ukraine's ability to penetrate deep Russian defenses, forced Moscow to respond, and added strain to Russian air defense resources. It also signals that Ukraine views the battle not just in trenches, but in the skies over enemy heartlands. The immediate material damage may have been limited, but the strategic ripple effects are larger, in resource allocation, morale, perception, and escalation risk. As the conflict continues, analysts will watch how Russia adapts, how Ukraine sustains such operations, and whether these raids help shift the balance by wearing down Russia's resilience rather than by capturing territory alone. The war may, in future, be as much about whose drones survive as whose soldiers advance.